talking a lot about nostalgia on the program today. It was just about half an hour ago we did a segment on the resurgence of film cameras and how people love vintage and nostalgia and the old times. Let's continue a little bit on that theme. Filmmaker Jason Bolanis is on a mission to romanticize Montreal's suburbs through film. In a short documentary series called Endangered Stories, Bolanis is celebrating local history in one of Montreal's suburbs, Pointe-Claire, reminding residents of the beauty within their suburb, even when they may seem mundane. He says that he hopes the series will represent the fleeting nature of memory and make people appreciate where they come from. Jason Bolanis joins us on the line. He's the owner of video marketing company Terranian. Jason, welcome to the show.
You know, it was a good choice of music. Thanks.
Absolutely. And you know, the video for that song, the Arcade Fire, The Suburbs, is like a short film in and of itself, right? To celebrate the suburbs and that kind of thing. So Jason, thanks for coming on the program, first things first.
Thank you.
Let me just ask you, do we underappreciate, you know, do suburbanites underappreciate where they came from?
I think when we're in the moment of living in the suburbs, maybe as kids, as teenagers, definitely we don't have a chance to look around and think, you know what, I live in a safe place. And you know what, there are pools everywhere. And wow, everything is kind of perfectly placed for where I am at this life stage. I mean, I'm sure people don't do that wherever they live. I think it's more cliche with the suburbs, though, you know, the way it's seen in pop culture. Especially, it's the boring place to live.
You're right. Like the suburbs always seem to be the butt of the joke, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of pop culture. So, Jason, when did you decide, hey, you know what, there's a story to be told here, whether it's from Pointe-Claire or just suburbs in general? When did you decide, hey, I got to tell a story?
It was 2018. I was actually doing a series about myself turning 40 years old, looking back at different stories in my life, things that I had done or hadn't done or needed to do before I turned 40. That was in 2018. And what happened was when I was doing that, I started to realize, you know, these stories all took place in the suburbs. And I thought, well, these are suburban stories and people were finding them interesting. And it was an accidental thing that I did a story about myself in one of the particular shopping malls that I grew up in. Which is the Pointe-Claire Plaza here. And in the plaza, someone mentioned that it was the oldest mall in Canada, and then I did a bit of research, and then I found out an article about the opening day at of the plaza, and I thought, well, how could it be a big thing? It's just the old shopping mall. Well, it was 3-day affair, and Boom Boom Jeffrey was here, and there were other celebrities that showed up. And I thought, how is this? Like, am I missing something here that happened that I don't know about? And then I started to get a flooding of comments about how great this mall was, that their parents took them here in the 50s, and Santa Claus, and it was the only mall. And it's like, you know what? I'd never looked at this place this way. For me, it was just as old as the pyramids here, always here, in the West Island. So that's what made me curious. That's what created the spark to say, there's an era that existed here before my own that I have never even known had existed, and there might be something there to talk about.
It's so interesting, the history of cities, towns, suburbs, and how they were built, and just how impactful a shopping mall of all things could be to a suburb. So the series here, Endangered Stories, right? It's a series here. So tell me about just where you've taken it in this series here. Tell our listeners about the various episodes in the series.
Well, what happened was I was doing research for one particular place that existed in the 50s that I couldn't find any information about the specific commercial establishment, but I was able to find out information about the era that it lived in, which was from 1950 to 1961. So in doing research of that time period in the West Island, in Pointe-Claire, I said to myself, okay, well, I'm not going to create a 7-hour video about this one little place. What am I going to do with all this information? So I said, well, let me cut all this up and create little segments. And as I was doing this, you know, of course, I'm speaking to people. I'm trying to figure out different ways of telling these little mini stories. For example, about a movie theater that existed in Pointe-Claire Village that I had no idea had existed. The building is still there, right? It's a pastry shop, I believe. But at one time, that building was built to be the first major movie theater in the West Island. and other things. Like, people have always said that Point Claire was cottage country, but it wasn't just cottage country. It was the main place for the upper class to come to in the summertime. There was 3-story hotels, 5-star hotels, massive country clubs that were extended into the bay in the 20s. Like, this, what is this world that we're living in that we had no idea existed before our time? So I started just splitting these things up into little segments. Now, the reason why I call them Endangered Stories is because these stories exist in one little book and in old newspaper articles, but primarily they exist with a generation. That's the baby boomer generation.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and a lot of these stories are very mundane about parks that they went to and fairs that existed. And these stories exist only in their heads right now. And doing these interviews, you see their faces light up with nostalgia, and I'm thinking, well, this is what needs to be told. But when this generation goes, which, let's be honest here, we have a good maybe 15 to 20 years left. These stories are gone. And I think because the boomer generation is so active in our community still, we don't see them as the way we saw our grandparents. I know you and I are about the same age. We don't see them as we see our grandparents, where it was, okay, their time has passed, they're mostly not working anymore, they're a little slower. The boomers are in their 70s, and they're still going. You know, so we don't look at them as what they know is as endangered. It is endangered.
We're with filmmaker Jason Bolanis from Terrarian Productions, talking about his short documentary series called Endangered Stories, stories from the suburbs and local history in places like Point Claire. So, Jason, just based on what you said, I kind of get the feeling that you've got a sense of urgency because of that, because of what you just outlined about how this generation, won't be here forever.
Oh, absolutely. And this is why, I'm trying to do as many interviews as possible, trying to piece together this as much as possible. And I'm trying to stay kind of as local as I can for now, even though, the rabbit hole is always going to go outside of the West Island. Mm-hmm. But also what's happening now is people are asking me, when are you going to start talking about the 80s? When are you going to start talking about the arcades that existed that don't exist anymore?
Wow.
So the difficulty in this is that as soon as you start talking about the mundane, you're really opening up a door that leads to so many different things. If I was just to talk about political history, it's very one-dimensional, and it's not that big of a problem. But as soon as you want to tell a story about a swing set that existed in a park that was not only a swing set, but it was the very first swing set, and it was a swing set that brought the community together, and now it's gone. No one's going to talk about that swing set anymore. Well, yes, you're right. There's a sense of urgency to tell the story about the swing set. But it's also to put it in a place in time that makes it a part of Point Claire's history, right? It's not just their specific history, but it's about how it is a piece of the puzzle, which is the greater history of Point Claire or of the West Island, the suburbs.
Jason, you must be getting bombarded with messages, right? So just starting this has maybe snowballed into so many other ideas for subsequent episodes.
It's actually very flattering. I have been getting messages from, let's say, baby boomers who still have parents who are alive, who are in their mid to late 90s. I got a message from someone on Monday because of the article that went out on me to say that their mother's still alive, living in the house she bought in the 50s, and she's 100 years old.
Wow.
And she still has all her marbles.
Wow.
And everything she has to say is endangered or almost extinct at this point.
Jason, before I have to wrap here, why don't you just tell our listeners how to watch, how they can participate? I know you've got a Facebook page and that kind of thing. How can I take part in the Endangered Stories?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. You can always message me privately through Facebook. You can message me on YouTube. You can go to jasonbolanis.com, which is my email. So on YouTube, you would search Jason Bolanis, and you'd get my page with all the stories there. On Facebook, it's Endangered Stories, pluralized, and you would go into that Facebook page, and you'd find all my stuff there. I also do advertisements as well. I put up old advertisements and colorize them and make them flashy from the 50s and before. And I would love to talk and interview anybody and everybody. And I'm also doing a live event January 11th at the Point Claire Library, where I'm going to be premiering a story that I've been working on for 4 years. That original story that I said that I was supposed to do 4 years ago, but I ended up having too much research. I'm finally going to be telling that story January 11th at the Point Claire Library.
Wow. Well, listen, Jason, it sounds amazing. I'm on the Facebook page, the Endangered Stories Facebook page right now. It's like an archival resource too, right? With the images that you've been posting as well of the past. Great stuff, Jason. I can tell from our interview you're a great storyteller. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, man. That's good to speak to you again.
That's a filmmaker, Jason Bolanis from Terrarian Productions. The series called Endangered Stories, celebrating local history in Point Claire, at least to start here. When we return on the Elias Makos Show, we'll take a look at tax.